Good afternoon and welcome to another one of the Trekstock Talks. I'm Toby and I'm part of the Trekstock Network, and we are here today to talk about fertility. And first up, I am joined on the wonderful sofa right here with Anya Sizer, who is from the Fertility Network UK, the London branch. That's right.
I'm the London rep.
You're the London
yes.
rep.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell us first of all, because I have no knowledge whatsoever of what the Fertility Network UK does?
So we are the patients' charity for anyone going through fertility issues whatsoever. So UK wide, and we are there to represent the patient voice in this whole field. So we do things like we run support groups, we do one-to-one support, we offer training. And one of the things that I'm most proud and passionate about is we do a lot of lobbying of Parliament and MPs and anyone who'll listen to us actually about fair provision for IVF. So at the moment it's very much postcode lottery, and Fertility Network and other people, but Fertility Network are campaigning very strongly to get this across the board to anyone who's eligible. So we do a wide variety of things, and some days I come in and meet lovely people like you, some days I'll go and run a support group. It's very varied, but a wonderful job to do.
And it's across the whole of the UK?
Yes, yeah, Northern Ireland, Scotland. Scotland's leading the way with anything to do with fertility provision, but we're a national charity, so very active.
And so if people wanting to get in touch, there's a website and
yes.
things, and you mentioned support groups.
Yes.
Is there quite an uptake in support groups around fertility?
So this again is something that I really enjoy doing. I have run support groups now for about 7.5 years, not non-stop obviously, but so I run them. I used to run one in Harley Street, and I now run one in Vauxhall, and they're just a really useful way for people to come and meet with other people going through issues around fertility, and just get some support from peers and swap ideas, swap resources. They're brilliant things to do.
And is it quite a lot of people who come quite regularly, or is it a lot of people drop in for one and then will not come back for a while?
Yeah, I think most people come quite regularly. Most people do a batch of time with it, and then there's times when it's the last thing and the last place that they want to be in, so they'll step out for a little bit and then maybe come back, but I've known people be in the same support group for years, a couple of years, and then move on one way or the other, but yeah, it depends on what they need at that time. Like I said, there are times that to be around other people talking about infertility is just too hard, and other times it's absolutely the right thing to do. So it's checking in with yourself and seeing what you need. But yes, we run them throughout the UK. They're a really good way to get some support.
And so with the Trekstock Network, there's a lot of young adults who have gone through or are experiencing cancer at the moment and facing up to fertility questions, I think is the way to put it. And do you see lots of young adults coming along to support groups?
We don't actually, no. Be more than happy to.
Yes.
I think support groups tends to be people that have been trying for a little bit, and then are probably about to start treatment of one form or another. So I think it's a little bit of a different lead up to the reasons for treatment. Anyone is welcome at a support group though. If you're struggling to conceive, if you're finding the whole issue difficult, then a support group, you're more than welcome to join. Yeah.
I was talking to you earlier just to say that from my experience of, so when I had Hodgkin's and I was facing up to having the treatment, I remember the first time I had treatment there was a discussion of going, go to this sperm bank, go and deposit sperm and things, but I didn't really understand what I was kind of doing. I was only 19 then, and then the second time when it came back, it's a case of you definitely need to go to this place, but you make these decisions when you're in that time, just going, yes, I'll go and do them, but then kind of don't really know what it might mean, don't really know what those, and so when if you are on the other side to a treatment which has left you infertile, what are the options? What are the options to a young person?
So it would be hopefully steered by GP or the hospital at that stage, and it would be looking at what provision is there for you, looking at the local CCGs, clinical commissioning groups, what their guideline is for treatment. Most people will try an NHS route, but unfortunately budgets are limited, and so actually at the moment about 60% of people do have to go down a private route for treatment. So some people will choose to get as much testing done on the NHS as they possibly can and then enter the private sector. But yeah, unfortunately most people do end up going down that route, and then it's a choice of an issue of choosing the best clinic possible, looking at the different criteria for that clinic. And it's interesting that you were saying almost about that feeling of not really having time to reflect and to realise what's going on, because actually for many people they can feel thrown into this whole crazy world of treatment. And I think it's quite good if you can to have a pause before going into any clinic or starting treatment and just sort of checking how you're doing, making sure the support is there. So it can feel very much like a conveyor belt. You can feel like you're just moving from one thing to another, and I'm sure for people that have gone through all that you've been through to then be thrust into the world of IVF treatment, it's another massive area, isn't it?
Yes. And so let's try and break down IVF, because I don't really know much about it. What is IVF treatment? What happens when you're going into it?
So it's a relatively new science. It's only been around since mid-late 70s, and yet it's massively fast moving. IVF, the heart of what it does is stimulating a woman's ovaries to produce eggs. The provision of sperm, whether it's through a donor or through a partner, and then the creation of the removal of the eggs, and then the creation of embryos, and then the insertion of embryos back into the woman with the hope of a positive pregnancy test. That's all very clinical, very sciencey, but that's the heart of what an IVF cycle is. There's many different ways of doing it, different protocols they're called, so different ways of doing IVF, short protocols, longer protocols, different types of drugs used. But at the heart of what you're doing is you're trying to create as many eggs create as many good, strong, viable embryos as possible, and then put them back in the woman with the hope of achieving a positive pregnancy. So yes, it's there's lots of different sections to it. There's lots of different stages to a treatment. I think that's often misunderstood in the public. I think there's a concept that it's almost a one-stop shop. You go in, do IVF, come out. But actually, there's lots of different stages to it.
And I guess as well, it's very dependent on the person as well. You go in and there's probably the preparation side of things can go on for a long time as well. I guess
most places they'll want to know the likelihood of response for a woman and for a man. So there's pre-investigation stages. So you'd be doing hormone profiles for men and women. You'd be doing semen samples for the men. You'd be looking at number of follicles on a woman. You could do a follicle count, checking womb lining. So there's a lot of preliminary investigations that would happen hopefully before an IVF cycle. And then the actual cycle itself can be anywhere between around 2 weeks and around 8 weeks. So it really varies, and it's very intrusive, it's very labour intensive, lots of clinic visits. Fertility Network have just done a survey fairly recently and found that the average couple needs 8 days off work, or 8 days available throughout an IVF cycle. So there's a lot of juggling work, juggling the rest of life when you're going through treatment. A lot of emotions involved, so it's a very, very intense time for any person, let alone someone that's been through cancer treatment previously. They're two very big arenas.
And because you've had your own experience with IVF before, and is it something that is like you have to make a decision with your partner? Is it that it's quite you go in together and go, well, this is what we want to go forward with?
Yes, it really needs to be a joint decision. You do every now and again see it being much more steered by a woman, and the guy being sort of more reluctantly brought along, but that's rare, I have to say. Generally it's a big life event that happens to men and women, and unfortunately in this area men are very often overlooked in it. Their feelings, their experience, they're part of the journey, just because their practical part is less, I guess, invasive than the woman's, lots of hormones being taken and things. It doesn't mean that the emotions are any less. And that's something I think as a network, as an organisation, we feel really strongly about, that men need a voice in this and men need to be heard.
You mentioned the emotional side of it. I guess that is something that's so often put to the side, but when you are facing up to something like going to these regular appointments and the pressures, I would guess as well, saying that it's a long process, what could young people be facing up to with that side of it?
So like I said, there's things like most people will end up having to pay, so there's financial, there's time, it being a massive commitment, but I would say the main pressure with fertility treatment is the unknown. I would genuinely say the hardest thing about it is just not knowing whether it's going to be successful or not. Although it's a science that does work, generally it's best to see treatment such as IVF as a course of treatment rather than a one-off, so that you may well be going through multiple cycles if you can. And there's no guarantee with it. The statistics are fairly low still, maybe around 35% per cycle. So there's no guarantee. You're investing a massive amount of emotional reserves, let alone all the other stuff, with no guarantee. And I think it's that uncertainty, coupled with a very strong desire for a family, that make it one of the biggest life crises that people can go through. So again, going back to that survey I mentioned, 90% of respondents said actually that they'd experienced feelings of depression when going through treatment. And that's definitely anecdotally something I would concur with, and it's from my own perspective, absolutely. We went through one of the toughest times in our marriage and one of the toughest times in our lives as individuals. It really does get to the heart of how you see yourself, what your role is in society, what your role is in a relationship, all of these kind of things. It really knocks who you are, and there's no definite outcome, and because of that tension, it really does make it a very, very difficult thing to go through.
And you've been through the process twice?
No, 5 times.
5 times? Right.
So our first time was successful, and our 5th time was successful.
Oh, right, okay.
And in the middle we had 2 miscarriages and we had 1 failed cycle as well. So we went through, it was about 6 years and 5 cycles of IVF. So we are incredibly lucky. We have 2 children from IVF, and we then adopted as well, just to really add to the chaos of life. But both are experiences that were very hard in different ways, but I feel very, very lucky to be where we are today, and it was a very big battle on all fronts, really.
Yes. You mentioned after the first successful child, like, is it a case of you expect, like, is it normal that maybe, because you would think that, it went well the first time, that is it normal that there can be complications with?
Yes, we refer to it as secondary infertility, and it's a very common situation, very misunderstood, in that a lot of the emotions can feel as intense as the first time around with primary infertility, and yet people's compassion levels towards you aren't always the same. I think people don't always get why you'd still be feeling very upset at not having a second child. So I think it's a very hard thing to go through, and many people do go through it. Our first IVF cycle, we were ridiculously given odds of 1 in 125,000 of it ever working, and told, please don't do it. So we did it, and it worked, and it was amazing and ridiculous. But we went into, I think, the second one, not thinking this is definitely going to work, because we'd had no sort of hope of it working the second time, but with such a massively strong desire to have our concept of a family. And I think that's the thing, for most people out there, concept of a family isn't one child. For some people it is, and that's absolutely brilliant, but for many people their concept of a family is 2 or 3 children, and I strongly believe that that's an absolutely justifiable and understandable passion and need. So secondary infertility is very common, it's certainly on the rise, and it's very misunderstood. We went through many years of secondary infertility until our little boy Barney came along on the 5th cycle.
And so if we've got couples who are thinking about going through IVF, what advice would you give to them as a couple if they're about to go into the process?
Brilliant. Get as much support as possible
Yeah.
right at the start, and that will vary hugely, not just from couple to couple, but actually within the couple, from person to person. So I would take some time out as a couple and think, right, what do we need to get through this next chapter in our lives?
Yes.
And if for you as the guy it's to tell a handful of people, and for me as the woman it's to tell no one, both of those reactions are absolutely fine, and you need to sort of work out how you can both be doing that. It's then thinking, how can we best support each other at this time? How can, checking in on regular occasions, how can I best support you at the moment? I think things like support groups or some online networks can be really, the message boards can be really helpful. I think one word of caution with the message boards is they can become almost quite addictive. So it's just to be wary of how often you're using it and the feelings that it's invoking. And if it's feeling a little bit like a real compulsion to get on the message boards all the time, then I'd ease off a little bit. But for the perspective of reaching out and knowing that you're not alone, they can be really helpful. So I would really start off with getting a good support structure. I would look at things like healthy eating, stress management, other nice things in life, making sure there's good friends around you. So looking at your life holistically and getting it into the best shape possible. And then going through the treatment, being really aware of what a treatment cycle looks like and how you can best support yourself at every stage. Are you a couple that's going to need to withdraw a little bit from your social group, or are you a couple that really need to just pretend almost everything's as normal and trug on? And both are fine options, but it's sort of making that decision as a couple before you start. And then just ultimately, the most important thing is to really, really lower your expectations of what you should be dealing with and how you should be dealing with it. This is a massive life event.
Yes.
Going through treatment is huge. So I think I would be wanting to say, look, just lower your expectations of what you can and can't manage at the moment. Be really kind to yourself. If you don't want to go to that baby shower that's being organised, don't go to that baby shower. If you want to retreat and watch box sets, then do that. Just be as kind to yourself as you would do to your own best friend, and find ways to muddle through this next chapter.
Is that a tough side of it as well? Is there a division between, like you mentioned, baby showers? There'll be friends who are going through a very what would seem as a natural way of having a child, and then people who are going through IVF. Is that something that you saw, or is it something that isn't really a big issue?
I think things like baby showers, Facebook announcements of pregnancies, scan photos are the things that come up all the time at the support groups, because they can just be so painful. And I genuinely think if you can't deal with it at this stage in life, then don't put yourself through it. If you can't manage going to a baby shower, then don't do it. Why should you put yourself through it? And it's very gently saying to a friend who's having a baby shower, I'm so pleased for you, and actually genuinely a part of you probably is very pleased for you, but this is what I can and can't manage at the moment. I'd love to take you out for a meal, and one-on-one we can hang out if that's applicable, but I can't do the big baby showers. And similarly with office announcements, it might be taking aside one or two people in the office and saying, look, if there's a pregnancy announcement, could you pre-warn me to give me a bit of breathing space so that I don't have to do happy face and then fall apart in the toilets? I think it's just being mindful of what you can and can't cope with during treatment, and I think lower the expectations. Yes,
being open about it to yourself as well as other people around you.
Yeah,
that's really.
We've got a question.
Oh yes, hi. It's Jemima. She's just.
What am I entitled to on the NHS in terms of NICE guidelines and postcode lottery? And what should I do if my local trust won't fund my IVF?
Right.
Can you repeat the question?
Well, I was about to get to that. So we want to talk about funding, and I mean it's a massive thing at the moment, and obviously the NHS are facing more and more cuts, and fertility is something that falls into that bracket. We've already mentioned earlier about private treatment. What what is available on the NHS and what isn't available?
Right, this is a massive question, and I could speak and get very angry for hours, so I need to do an abridged version. But basically, the guidelines, the NICE guidelines, say that every couple that's eligible and meets eligibility criteria should be offered 3 full cycles of IVF on the NHS.
Okay.
The NHS is not just there for life and death treatments.
Yes.
It is there for many other forms of treatment, and it has to be about whether it's cost effective and about quality of life. And for me, it boils down to the right to try for a family should not be about who can and can't afford it. So, that said, currently, the vast majority of CCGs are not adhering to NICE guidelines, and it's being seen as a soft target, and IVF is being cut. So if you are in that situation at the moment, the 2 things you must do are write to your MP, because actually there is a bit of a behind the scenes groundswell of MPs really starting to take notice of this. There is work behind the scenes about getting a national pricing tariff for IVF. So I would get on board with your MP, go and speak to them in person and explain to them why this is important. I would then contact your CCG with the NICE guidelines and say this is what I should be entitled to, and get that dialogue open. If you want any help with that, Fertility Network can help.
Great.
We've got things you can download on the website to help with that, but please get in touch with us and we can talk you through how to do the process. It's not as big and scary as it sounds, and there have been times when People Power has overturned it. So in Bedfordshire, they were consulting about whether to cut all funding, and actually they chose to retain funding in their area because of the public pressure.
Yes.
So it can make a difference, and we will support people every step of the way, because I firmly believe that it shouldn't be just if you have enough money to try for a family that you can go ahead with it. It should be available to everyone. It's a basic human right.
You mentioned criteria there, though.
Yes.
What is the criteria, or if it's easier, where can we find information on what the criteria is for people?
I would look it up on NICE, but that you have to meet eligibility about no previous children and age and BMI. There's a list of criteria, but it's not massive, it's not extensive.
Okay.
And even things like the no previous children, I think some councils adhere to that and some don't. So I would go and check the full guidelines, check whether you're eligible for them, and if you are, I would get onto the MPs and get onto the CCGs with our support, and we will help you.
Thank you. I've got a quick question before we finish, which is about egg and sperm donors.
Yes.
And about where you find them. I was saying earlier, is it a bit like, can you get like an app like Tinder?
Yes, you
can. You?
Yes, there is. Well,
so you can just like swipe and go.
Some clinics, so the London Sperm Bank have an app.
Wow.
Yes,
You have an app.
but that's a private clinic.
Okay.
So there are places you can go to in the private sector and in the public sector. Again, it's about whether you get if there's any eligibility for NHS provision. But in this country, actually, there's been quite a lot of change in terms of sperm and egg donation. And sperm donors are really, really well regulated, heavily screened, and generally in this country are doing it for very altruistic reasons. There's no financial incentive for sperm donors. There's a thank you for egg donors of £750 only, which basically covers time off work and is a bit of a thank you, but it's in no way an incentive.
No.
So the incentive to be a donor these days is altruistic in general. And they have worked on ways to make it more accessible. So the London Sperm Bank, for example, do an app, but most clinics will be able to talk you through, and it is a fairly straightforward process. In terms of the logistics, what I would say is make sure that you've really thought through in terms of the emotional impact.
Yes.
And again, there's some great organisations. The Donor Conception Network are brilliant at being able to talk people through some of the emotions that may come up and some of the practicalities that may come up for welfare of the child. So it's very. In some ways it's simple and accessible, and in other ways it's really making sure you are well informed and empowered, I guess, to go forward with it.
And there's more. Is there more information on Fertility Network UK?
Yes, and also the Donor Conception Network are very good in terms of really specifically supporting couples with that. So I'd go to them as well.
We should probably mention really quickly about what happens if IVF isn't an option, and what happens if you can't go down that route. What other options are available to?
So it isn't an option in terms of funding, or in terms of for the couple.
For the couple maybe it's they've gone through a few cycles and it isn't an option.
Okay, so if they've come to the end of that, there are options obviously of adoption. So again, you guys are the experts with this, but from what I've been reading, you can go forward after treatment into adoption in the same way that anyone can after any medical issue. You just need a GP. I mean, anyone going through adoption needs a GP full examination and referral letter, and generally you have to pay for that, and it is very comprehensive and very thorough. So if you're someone that's been through cancer treatment, that will be part of your story, but from what I've read, it's not something that would negate you going forward as an adoptive parent. And personally, I think it makes for a very strong person, and I think the personality traits that you'll have had to work on and display going through treatment actually would make you a better parent. Resilience and learning about self-care and all of those things. I think in terms of carrying that forward to be an adoptive parent, they would be really useful tools.
And where's the best place to look into things about adoption? Is that
so? I'd start at First for Adoption,
which
has got loads of information on, and then people tend to again go down two routes. You can either go down local authority routes, so looking at your local authority and seeing when they have open evenings and going and getting information from them. Or there are charities like PACT, Bernardo's, Quorum that do adoption as well, and would be more than happy. You could just ring them up and find out more information from them. But actually, I think anyone that's been through a massive life event, as many people here will have done, I think you've got an amazing skill set to carry forward as parents, and certainly as adoptive parents. So don't downplay what you've been through.
Wonderful. That's so much brilliant information there, and if you guys have got any other questions, you can obviously drop Jemima an email at health@trekstock.com. I've got a card here. She was very insistent today that I got that right. health@trekstock.com. Thank you very much, Anya, for coming and speaking with us today.
Lovely to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks.